Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And probably the most important and the most interesting pictures and updates are coming from the United States of America. Let's take a look at this article. In this video, in this article, we can see American intelligence officer Vogel released in Russia with a can of beer in his hand and American flag around his neck in the White House with Trump. Thanks Putin for his release, and says that he was treated very kindly in Russia. Right now, in front of your screens, you can see the end of the conflict, the beginning of the end of the conflict in Ukraine, and most likely this conflict will be finished in Russian favor, because we see that from this perspective, from this side, the United States of America launched official, official media attack, official media event that shows that Russia is not so bad, that Russia is good, that Russia released American spy, American officer who was working for the United States of America. But from another side, from the other hand, we can see completely opposite events on the territory of Ukraine in Kyiv. For example, according to information we have, U.S. Treasury Secretary to visit Ukraine to discuss access to critical minerals. That was stated by Bloomberg. Scott Bessent is expected to visit this week to discuss agreements with Kyiv on access to critical minerals. Earlier, Trump said that he wants to receive from Ukraine the equivalent of 500 billion spent on aid in the form of rare earth metals. This is very important and very interesting things with these numbers. We will discuss this in a minute. Another article was published by Fox News. U.S. Treasury Secretary to ask Zelensky where Ukraine's funding went. So, if you remember, several weeks ago, Zelensky stated that Ukraine, since the beginning of the special military operation, had received just 75 billions, and that's it. And he didn't know where the rest 200 billions went or something like that. And later, Trump stated that Ukraine should pay the United States of America $500 billion. And the most important and the funniest thing in this situation is that Zelensky accepted this without even saying even a single word. So he said that he received 75 billions, but he accepted to return $500 billion. Obviously, these numbers are very, very interesting, and it's very difficult to understand where is the mass and how it happens. How does it happen? So this is the situation between these countries. Once again, we are at the beginning of the end of the conflict, most likely, and let's discuss several more statements made by Zelensky. For example, today and these days, Zelensky also stated that he doesn't want security guarantees just from Europe. There are voices which say that Europe could offer security guarantees without the Americans, and I always say, Zelensky, no security guarantees without America are not real security guarantees. So this is his statements. He understands that without the United States of America, Europe will not be able to hold the Russian pressure. Also, he stated that Zelensky wants to offer Russia a direct exchange of territory, giving the lands that Ukraine armed forces have occupied in the Kursk region to Russia since the start of the offensive. We will exchange one territory for another, he said, but hastened to add that he did not know how much of the Russian occupied land Ukraine would ask for in return. So I don't know, we'll see. So this is his, of course, wishful thinking. We will discuss the situation in the Kursk region in a minute, because the situation there is very critical, and most likely Zelensky is not going to receive anything, and most likely very big problems Zelensky is going to face in the very near future. But before this, let's discuss another important topic. Russia today, this previous night, between the 11th and the 12th of February, launched another massive missile strike with Iskander. There were a lot of Iskanders, several explosions. Some sources are saying that there were up to 10 explosions all over the entire territory of Kyiv. Lots of buildings were destroyed, lots of warehouses, ammo depots were damaged and destroyed. This attack was, carried out also with drones, ground drones, and we see complete absence of any Ukraine air defense. This is very important part. Ukraine doesn't have air defense that can even protect the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, so Russia can do whatever they like. I'll remind you that the last massive missile strike took place somewhere in the end of December. Since that moment, the Russians managed to accumulate significant number of missiles, and if the Russians decide to attack, they can turn the Ukrainians completely off from electricity and from everything the Russians wanted. Ukraine doesn't have any more air defense, and this is very, very critical for Ukrainians. Now let's discuss the situation in the Kursk direction, because the most terrible updates are coming from this area. I'll remind you that just a week ago we were talking a lot about the situation in Ruskaya Porечная. When the Russians entered the settlement, they managed to record the significant number of war crimes committed by the Ukrainian soldiers. Lots of people were killed, lots of people were tortured, and the pictures and the situation from the settlement camp was terrible. And this situation was also discussed in the United Nations organization. And I'll remind you that several days ago the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to take under control or liberate the settlement of Darina. And the first updates, the first events about war crimes committed by the Ukrainians in this area, the Russians start publishing them. So today the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that in Darina, Kursk region, Ukraine armed forces militants killed almost all men. According to the department, locals residents were held hostage by Ukrainian armed forces for more than 6 months. As a result of these events, only one man survived. The circumstances of the incident are being clarified. And if you remember, I've been talking a lot about this situation. I told you that for Zelensky, Sudzha is not the problem that's very difficult to hold. That's the Ukrainians suffer losses and many, many other things. It's not the most important and probably difficult thing for Zelensky. For him, the biggest problem is that when Ukrainians leave Sudzha, when they return back this territory to Russia, Russia most likely will discover thousands of war crime cases, and obviously Russia in its own history will call this episode as a genocide of people who were living there. And this might attack, and this might be probably the last, attack, the last on Zelensky and Ukraine reputation, which will lead to unpredictable consequences. And something tells me that after Russia will discover and will record every single war crime committed by the Ukrainians in this area, Russia most likely will recognize Zelensky and Ukraine probably as a terrorist state. It's very likely that it will happen after the Russians return control over this territory, because situation once again there is very critical. Now let's move further and let's go to the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the South Donetsk direction. The Russians took under control some territories in the area and in the direction of the settlement by the name of Novosilka. For example, this is the situation in this part of the front line. So just several tree lines were captured by the Russians. This information was provided by neutral mappers. Also, the Russians managed to maintain the lines along the Mokry Yaly river. This information was also provided us by neutral mappers, and according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions a little bit in the direction of the settlement by the name of Dniproenergia. So this is the situation in this area, and the Russians are saying that the armed forces of Russian Federation have begun another full-scale offensive operation with the purpose to break through the Ukraine defense belt and maybe to defeat them completely. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the Andreevka fortified area. As you can see, we have adjusted the map once again. According to neutral mappers, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their positions here significantly for the previous 24 hours. As a result of clashes, according to different mappers, the Russians established control for more than over 70 or 80% of the settlement. Just something like 30-20% left under complete Ukrainian control, and we're talking about the most western part and the northwestern part. The situation for the Ukrainians here is very critical, and this situation can lead to creation of another cauldron in this area. Now let's discuss the situation further. According to information we have, according to pro-Russian resources, the Russians also managed to establish complete control over the road TO 515 between the settlement of Yasenevo and the settlement of Andreevka. And this is very important piece of news, because the Russians by this managed to improve their entire logistic between the city of Pokrovsk, where the Russians continue their offensive operation, and the city of Donetsk. As for the Pokrovsk direction, telling the truth, the situation for the Russians here is not very good. And I believe that if nothing changes, Ukrainians most likely in the near future will be able to cut this salient and to take under control everything to the north and to restore the railways between Dachne, Kotlin, and the city of Pokrovsk itself. For example, in this video, we can see Russian attempt to counterattack. In this video, we can see how the Russians were trying to bring additional forces in the area of Kotlin, but the Russians were completely destroyed. And this is not an attempt from Ukrainian side to counterattack. These are the Russians who were counterattacking with the purpose to restore control over the lost positions. I believe that in a day or in a two, we're going to receive additional changes, and we will color maybe even the entire Kotlin in Ukrainian favor. As for the settlement of Pishchane, here we can see the same story. The Ukrainians continue their counterattacks. Yesterday we adjusted the map in Ukrainian favor, and during the morning and nights between the 11th and the 12th of February, we got lots of reports from pro-Russian resources that the settlement of Pishchane was completely recaptured by the Ukrainians. As for now, we kept some territories in Ukrainian favor, some territories in contested zone, some territories under complete Russian control, but once again, according to different pro-Russian, very reliable resources, the settlement of Pishchane is completely under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. So this is the very critical situation, and this is the beginning of complete collapse of Russian positions in this salient, because without Pishchane, Russian soldiers, Russian authorities have no chances to supply and support their forces in this area. Now let's move further. As for the rest of the situation, we have no changes, significant changes, just regular videos. For example, from the city of Toretsk, how the Ukrainians were FPV droning and attacking the Russians in the most northern part, which confirms Russian control over this area. We have several videos from the Sivers direction of how the Russians were bombing and attacking. We have some changes on the ground according to pro-Russian resources in the southern Kupiansk direction or the Liman direction. So nothing special, just regular activities. Probably the most important update is coming from the northern Kupiansk direction, where the Russians published the video with a very good quality, how they managed to damage or even destroy once again another bridge, another crossing over the river of Oskol. So it doesn't mean anything, but maybe the Russians are planning to begin offensive in this direction as well. And that's it for the short video. Military summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.